Okay, good. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes. I see the numbers are rising by the second of people who are joining in. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes and then we'll kick off. Yeah, I can see all the participants coming in. We're just going to wait until 2 minutes past so that everybody gets a chance to join, and then we'll kick off. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to, I think, the first SAIIA event of the year put out by the South African Institute of International Affairs. I'm Stephen Gruzd, and I am going to be your moderator today, and I head up SAIIA's African Governance and Diplomacy Program, which looks at democracy, elections, and governance on the African continent. We are delighted to have a very esteemed panel today of Mozambique experts who will hopefully shed light on what's happening and what might happen in future. First of all, Marisa Lourenço, based in Johannesburg. She's an independent specialist risk consultant with over a decade of experience covering the sub-Saharan African region. She provides country risk analysis and due diligence investigations for firms and organizations operating in the region, including mining, energy, tech, and health. She has Fortune 500 global companies amongst her clients and is a frequent analyst on the media, both internationally and South Africa. Welcome, Marisa. Thank you very much for joining us. Our second panelist is Egídio Chaimite, a researcher, program designer, and coordinator with extensive expertise in governance, elections, human rights, and social movements, currently serving as a senior researcher at the Institute for Social and Economic Studies in Mozambique. He has a PhD in development studies from the IDS at the University of Sussex and a master's in political sciences from Sciences Po. And our third panelist today will be André Mulungo, an activist at the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Maputo, and also a journalist. So welcome everybody to the discussion today. Yes, from the perspective of South Africa, where I'm situated, we look nervously over our eastern border at what has been happening in Mozambique, certainly for the last 3 or 4 months. Before that, with our eyes on northeastern Mozambique, where Cabo Delgado has been really in the news, and we have been sending troops to help the Mozambicans with the problem, but that hasn't seemed to work out so well. And of course, before that, the civil war, which lasted many years. So we are very much affected by what happens in Mozambique. And I want to start with you, Egídio, just to really set out for us what is actually happening, what is going on in Mozambique, what precipitated this crisis that has unfolded on our screens and in our inboxes, and of course, very real for the people of Mozambique. So if you just take a couple of minutes to lay out the problem, the issues.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, your audio is not great. You are breaking up a little bit. Okay. Okay, sorry, could you start again? We didn't get that.
SAIIA for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, the sound is really.
straight to the question. Yeah.
Egídio, can you?
Yeah, I was just going straight breaking this, just let me know. Yeah, but I was move this and try like this.
Yes, it's better.
Hello? Okay. Sorry there. Maybe I had my headphones. But yeah, I was going straight to the question. Greeting everyone, good afternoon. And again, thank you, SAIIA, for inviting me to attend this webinar. Yeah, about what's happening. Yeah, we have had so many analyses and so many terms to describe the reality. Yeah.
Egídio, sorry, your sound is just not great. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do. Maybe if you switch your camera off.
We are electoral price, revolts, and even here in Mozambique, we even talk about revolutions. Yeah. But today, when I was preparing to attend this webinar, kind of differently, I decided to call it a movement of. So sorry for this. I had this type of problems. Yeah. So I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, it's better.
Yeah.
Egídio, we've lost you.
Egídio, you are now muted.
Okay. Okay, you're unmuted. Let's try you again.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it audible?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking that although there are many terms used to describe the reality, today it came into my mind to call it a kind of a movement. I'm putting that in those bold terms. And why am I calling it? Well, it's unprecedented in the country, of course. And the reason I'm calling it that way has to do with an image Mozambicans have of being, let's say, a kind of passive and you see docile, and even in face of injustice, electoral issues, electoral fraud included. Electoral fraud is not new to our reality since our founding election in 1994. We have had it in 1999. We have very tense elections with protests afterwards, with death in the north of the country, and then the following elections were also very tense. But even with those very situated or located, one of is that of people who are docile, quiet. They don't protest in general. That's an image. Even our politicians like to highlight that, even if it's not reality. So when I decided to call it the movement to awakening citizenship, or reshaping citizenship, if you wish, is exactly because this time things went higher, and people decided to shape not just the image as such, but the system in whole, not just going to, even if the electoral issues, but they went further and put forward questions around accountability, equity, dignity, and like that, they are shaking, as I was saying, the foundation of political structure that was long relied on that silence. So I'm bringing that term as the starting point, a movement of awakening citizenship, just to start the discussion. But if we go to the immediate triggers, we can talk about electoral issues, fraud, but things are far beyond electoral issues. And now we are talking about something much deeper, a movement that goes beyond this discussion. So yeah, I think for starting, those are the key elements I can highlight. We can come into details during the discussion.
Thank you. And we seem to have sorted out the problems with the sound. Apologies to everybody who's listening. Marisa, how do you see it from where you sit? If you were explaining this to somebody from another continent or another planet, in very simple terms, what's been happening? You're just on mute. There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, that's quite a big ask to simplify such a big situation. But I think what we can see here is, these protests were unprecedented in the forms of post-election unrest, but we've seen Mozambican society very, very dissatisfied with the status quo for a number of years now. And I think what is different this time around is just, we've seen the high cost of living, we've seen high inflation, the currency weakening, and all of that is putting the local population under a lot of pressure. And what we have to keep in mind is that Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world. We've also seen, poverty rising in the country. And all of this dissatisfaction has been directed, towards the state, but Frelimo and the state are kind of conflated. So when Frelimo came out and, it had won the election, parliamentary and presidential by one of the widest margins in years, it was just too much of, a blatant kind of in your face to the population to say, well, nothing is really going to change for you and we don't really care. And I think that was the tipping point. But over the last few years, we have seen, high numbers of strikes by doctors, teachers, nurses, even judges, primarily over housing, wages, difficult working conditions. Most of the time it's late payments. And eventually, it reached a tipping point.
Okay. And André, just from from your perspective, what do you think has been going on in Mozambique? How do you understand it?
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to share my opinion about what's going on in Mozambique and what might happen in the future. First of all, let me say that we are a democracy since we had our first election in 1994. But in October, 9th October 2024, we had also election. Historically, all the election are contested in Mozambique because of fraud. There's how can I say, a consensus here in Mozambique that all the election are rigged elections. So what is going on now is that we're having protests. But is a mistake to say that the protest, the cause of the protest is only the justice or the truth of the election. We have it's true that the problem, the main cause of the problem are the justice. But we have another problems. We can consider social, economic problems. So we have to join those two problems. So you can ask why we have the protest in a way that we're having now. Why we didn't have this kind of movement, this kind of protest, for instance, in 2020, for instance. What I think is that here in Mozambique, historically, we had a late leader of a former rebel movement called the Afonso Dhlakama. For the citizens, for part of the citizens, considered Afonso Dhlakama as the one that represents them. That was the one that was fighting for their rights. When Afonso Dhlakama passed away, it's normal to hear in Mozambique that the citizens are orphans of leaderships. When Afonso Dhlakama passed away, Renamo elected the one called the Ousuf Momad, but Ousuf Momad didn't respond to what the citizens was calling. For instance, people consider Renamo former rebel movement as an alternative for Frelimo ruling party. But with Ousuf Momad, was impossible to see this. So begin the moment that the citizens felt themselves orphans of a leadership, the citizens decided themselves to fight for their rights, to fight to see the will respected. What I'm trying to say is that if we consider that the election a rigged election, the citizens saw in a person of Afonso Dhlakama the one that will fight for their rights. Now they don't have Afonso Dhlakama, so they decide to do this by themselves. But as I said, it's not only because of election, it's also about exclusion, about a lot of marginalized people, like youths that are demanding jobs, that are demanding this opportunity even to go to school. So we are talking about the problems coming from election, but also we have to consider economic and social problems.
Great. Thank you, all three of you, for those opening remarks and trying to set out the stall as to what's happening in Mozambique. Marisa, I'll come back to you and ask you, what do you think is the role of the opposition at the moment? What, the title of our discussion is A Tale of Two Emperors. We had the inauguration of President Chapo, but we also had an alternative inauguration of Venancio Mondlane. What do you think the role of the opposition has been? What can they still do? Do they have to just accept that this is the way that things are? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think the opposition is in quite a tough position at the moment, but I think we also have to split it into two. So we've got Venancio Mondlane on the one side, who ran as the presidential candidate, but he does not have any representation in parliament because his party, the SAIIA, was actually excluded from contesting the parliamentary elections before the elections took place, which was regarded as an unfair move by Frelimo to try to undermine him. But then he still ended up running as a presidential candidate, and then he was supported by now what is the main opposition, Podemos, and they've taken over from Renamo as the main opposition. So that's also a very big shift that we have seen in the opposition landscape. The thing is that now, because Podemos decided to take its seats in parliament, that was a little bit of a divergence from the agreement that they had with Mondlane. So Mondlane, effectively, he's been the driver behind these protests, the driver, especially calling attention, I think, from the international community to what's going on in Mozambique and really supporting, the population's frustration against the status quo. He doesn't have that kind of, he doesn't have as much prominence in terms of, your sort of legal formal mechanisms now. What will be interesting to see, though, is how his relationship develops with, the party that he was from, the party that, supported his presidential bid. He also used to be part of the other main opposition, Renamo, as well. So what we've seen with Mondlane, he's not necessarily having to stick to one party. He will, go for what will work and what will try to affect the most change. So, and he's not backing down at the moment. He's still saying, like you mentioned, he did his own inauguration. He continues to encourage protest, but he faces an uphill battle because Frelimo is not backing down. As you said, they went ahead with the inauguration for Chapo. We also had the Constitutional Court. It altered some of the results, but it effectively solidified Frelimo's win. And once all of this has happened, because Frelimo controls all of these state organs, it controls the courts, it's very, very difficult to fight against that. And, Chapo has been appointing his cabinet, he's been making all his moves. And I think when Podemos decided to take its seats in parliament, it was effectively saying, we accept that Frelimo has won the parliamentary election and that it will install its president. And it sort of made a decision to kind of, I suppose, fight the system from within. Now, what unfortunately we do see, or what we have seen in Southern Africa, is that, sometimes you get a great opposition, and what Podemos has achieved, to now become the main opposition, to take that mantle from Renamo is remarkable. It represents a very big change in Mozambican politics. But unfortunately, what we do see sometimes, and, only time will tell, but sometimes we see the opposition start to fragment and infighting happening. And that is something that could potentially evolve. As the next 2 to 3 years go by, is it going to be able to stand up to Frelimo in parliament? I mean, obviously Frelimo is still the biggest party. The political elite is embedded in every facet of Mozambican business and society. Challenging that is going to be difficult. We also have to remember that, being a member of parliament, no matter which party you're in, comes with huge privileges. And sometimes opposition is not always there for the betterment of society. It's also to get into positions of power. For them, is untested, it's new. So we have to wait and see. But if the opposition can carry on building on the gains that it's made in this election, it will definitely be a headache for Frelimo going forward. It just remains to see how much they're willing to push, and also how much Frelimo is going to push back. It's already pushed back a lot. It's very authoritarian. I think it's getting worse. But how that will play out in the future will be very interesting to see.
Egídio, maybe you can talk a little bit about the climate in which the election was held. On the day of voting, what was the mood, and how has it changed, if it has, in the ensuing months with all the protests? What's the national temperature, and what was the climate for the elections?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Well, I wanted to add to the previous question you asked to Marisa, because it bring us back to to very important details about how we arrived at this stage, and it connects also to what André Mulungo was explaining. And I was thinking of the role of the opposition retrospectively, and then thinking of the scenarios and what's coming ahead. So, and then I'll come to the question you asked.
No
problem. Yeah, the point there about the opposition first. Yeah, we used here in Mozambique to have Frelimo ruling and the main opposition party being Renamo. They are the two parties that always had that much influence in our political scenarios. And in the last years, Renamo got weak. And in the last 2, 3, 4 years, there was a crisis inside Renamo itself. And Venancio Mondlane, the one who is mobilizing people for the protests, he himself comes from Renamo. And then from the crisis inside Renamo and the opposition in general, and a new figure came up. So this we need to say. There's where comes Venancio Mondlane, and he managed to do what the opposition should do. And the question there, which is to highlight the problems of the system, mobilize that, and make a movement like the one we are seeing now. Exactly, he's doing what? He's taking all those grievances. Marisa and André talked about poverty rising, inequalities rising. We got numbers, for instance, in the last 10 years, poverty rising from 45% to 65%. It's too much. And then inequality as well follow the same path. And another interesting figure, the World Bank used to highlight that has to do with unemployment. We have youth, about 500,000 young people come to the market seeking jobs every year, and just 100,000 managed to get those opportunities. So we have 400,000 young people in every year without the possibility of finding a job. Those are tensions that are in society. And the opposition do what? It exactly takes those tensions, mobilize it, and make a movement like the one we are having now. This is the first time we're having a real big challenge to Frelimo, because there was a good movement mobilized, in this case by Venancio Mondlane, that led us here. So now, starting from there, I'm thinking about the ways ahead, maybe scenarios, if that's the case, even if that was not the question you asked. So I'm thinking now, after Marisa explained about what's happening even inside the opposition, about two big scenarios. Two big scenarios, one in which the tension, the violence escalates, and we have more authoritarianism. That's the pessimistic scenario. Another very optimistic, in which there is dialogue, and then we have stability and agreements between the opposing parts. So I'm putting dialogue at the heart of both scenarios, the optimistic and the pessimistic one. And if I go back to the pessimistic one and bring some details, let's imagine that, there is no compromise. Venancio is not invited to the table because that's what we are having now. There is dialogue, there are conversations between the leader, Daniel Chapo, who is the incumbent now, and the other opposition figure. But the key figure is not there, Venancio Mondlane. So if we don't have him there on the table and things continue the way they are, what may happen here is that this may escalate because he may continue mobilizing people to protest, mobilize people for civil disobedience, and the response, and we are used to that by the system, will be with more repression. We are used to repression to add all types of protests in Mozambique. And what happens with that, those two issues happen as well. It's a cycle of violence, never-ending violence, and opposition figures being persecuted, some put in jail, even some killed. The police have been killing so many people these last days, and that's the worst scenario, undesirable scenario. So the optimistic one, as I was talking about that one, is when we think that, okay, they're open for dialogue, Venancio is invited to the table, he puts his demands. Of course, he himself too, he has to rethink the things he's putting as conditions for the dialogue, because one of the main requests was that the electoral truth, putting the term translating directly, could be the issue of electoral truth is what he wanted exactly. But now it's difficult to attend that because even the electoral material have been destroyed. So now he needs to open his claims, his demands, and go to the table. But leadership is key in this case. Daniel Chapo is the one who has more responsibility. So he needs to bring everyone to the table, compromise, and then that's the only way we can go forward. So I'm putting these two scenarios just to help the discussion. I think Marisa brought very, very interesting elements about the other question you were asking. So.
Okay. André, you're a journalist. How does it look to you? You know, what do you think has been the various roles that the media have played in either shortening or prolonging the crisis?
Okay, thank you again. But let me add some points that I think that is very important for our conversation. I agree with Marisa and also with Egídio when they are talking about the Venancio Mondlane. We do agree that he is a very important actor in this movement. But what I think is that this is not about Venancio Mondlane. It's about the citizens. As I said before, when we hear what people are saying is that they are how can I say, are tired of 15 years of misgovernment of Frelimo. They are demanding change. So even if we don't have Venancio, someone else will be just to lead the citizens. Here is not because of Venancio, it's because of the citizens. Venancio Mondlane is, as I say, is a very important actor. But the most important things here to understand is because the citizens are tired, and they demand change. Why people are on the street is because, as Marisa said, Frelimo ruling party captured the institution. So if you try to fight against the fraud, you have to make appeals, for instance, in CNE or constitutional councils or the other courts. But the courts are controlled by the Frelimo ruling party. So the feeling now inside the citizens is that we don't have where we can address our demands. So now it's time to do for us, to do we have to do for ourselves. So Venancio Mondlane, I repeat, is important, but what we have to understand, even I used to hear people saying that they will kill Venancio. Even if you kill Venancio, the people will continue. If Venancio is, someone said, Venancio is going to be part of the government of Chapo. Part of the season say, if he is going to be part of the season, because it means that he abandoned us. It shows that the citizens knows what they want, what's important for them. Talking about sinners, or that the Egídio Chaimite, I'm going to answer your question, Stephen. But let's talk about sinners. The first one that I think that is important is to try to solve this problem through dialogue. But in this dialogue, we have to include Venancio Mondlane, as I said, is the key actor in this process. If you don't have Venancio Mondlane there, I don't think that we are going to have a peace that we desire now. Now we have situations that some roads are blocked. Some gates are blocked. Why are blocked? Because Venancio Mondlane ordered the citizens to do that. So when Chapo and the Usufu and the Lutero are on the table in the dialogue, Venancio Mondlane is how can I say it, is ruling the country by his way. So if we don't have Venancio Mondlane on the table, I don't think that we are going. It's possible to have the peace that we desire. So the first thing that I think that's important is to try to solve this by dialogue. The second one is for Frelimo understand that they have to let it go. Letting it go, as Chaimite was saying, is to live in a tension, in a permanent tension, and with repression by the police. Even if the police control the situation, time in time we're going to have a protest in smaller or bigger dimension, but the protest will be there. Talking about the press, here in Mozambique we are divided. We have the press that I can say that on the side of the system, and we can have on the other hand the press that we can see that they are telling the truth. So in general now what we have is a country divided. We have one saying that what the citizens are doing is not good, and we have another part saying that is a constitutional right, for instance, to be in the street in demonstration. So it's not only about the press; it's in general about the country. We have a divided country.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers and your inputs there. Maybe just we're going to get to questions shortly from people, so please type them into the chat. We've already got a number that have come through. I guess the first thing I want to ask is, none of you have really mentioned the problems in the north, the insurgency, what's happening in Cabo Delgado. To what extent has that fed into this crisis? Is it something different from the electoral crisis? Is it connected? I mean, I'm sure everything is connected, but in what way does the fact that there is such instability in the north, that there's been so much displacement of people, that oil and gas were discovered that will make the drilling companies very rich, but people are still very, very poor, exploited by Islamist groups in that part of the world. How are these crises connected, if at all? Maybe Marisa, will start with you.
Sure. So I primarily see them as separate issues, even though, of course, they do overlap. So I think if we look at the insurgency in the north, what we have there, we have to remember, that Mozambique, it's a very big country, and all of the power is concentrated in the south, in Maputo. And, and that's traditionally, Frelimo's stronghold. And then you've got the center, and I'm simplifying it, but that was, where Renamo has traditionally been, or historically been, a lot more powerful. And then you get northern Mozambique, which, you know, I would describe as just effectively being stateless. And this, you know, left a vacuum, which then was eventually exploited by extremists. And then, you know, much later we saw the Islamic State come in, but it already found a homegrown insurgency there. And what this really spoke to was just effectively centuries of neglect of that part of the country, you know, that then post-colonial Mozambique, and then after the Civil War, then when it eventually transitioned into a multi-party democracy, even if only in name, it never really managed to address issues in that part of the country. And it's one of the most underdeveloped parts of Mozambique. So you have a lot of, you know, high socioeconomic challenges there, and you do have a lot of frustration. And then, yeah, like I said, because of this vacuum, you know, other bad actors come in and then they sort of take on the role of the state in that way. What we've seen with these election protests is dissatisfaction with Frelimo and with the status quo, which does overlap with what happens in the north, because, you know, some of the reasons for local populations joining the insurgency was, you know, a complete lack of faith in Frelimo to deliver any kind of socioeconomic benefits to them. So in that way, they overlap. But I think if we look at Mozambique being kind of unstable as a country, we have pockets of instability. So we've got a very specific problem in northern Mozambique, which, you know, has calmed down, but is obviously still ongoing and will be very, very difficult to actually clear away entirely. We saw protests as well that happened in December around Afungi, which is Total Energy's big LNG site, where people were almost, they were protesting against what they said was a violation of land rights, and they went on for almost, there were demonstrations for about 2 weeks. And these were almost spurred by the election, not because they necessarily related to the post-election unrest, but because local populations were saying, well, look, if people can protest in the cities against, well, maybe we can also protest against, you know, violations that we feel that we have suffered. So in that way, they start to overlap. But yeah, and in some way, these issues are across Mozambique. But, you know, I think the kind of post-election protests, those are very much, you know, concentrated in the cities, and people really want to see political change. They want to see a different president. They want to see a different parliament. They want to know that the future will be different. Whereas the issues in the north are very much rooted in the kind of attributes of that part of the country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. André, do you see them as connected or more separate, like a double tsunami that's hitting Mozambique at the same time? Or do you see connections and interrelatedness between what's been rumbling on in the north for, you know, Marisa says centuries, but certainly, you know, it's come to the world's attention in the last 7 or 8 years?
I fully agree with Marisa. We have a specific, how can I say, specific problems in the north of Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado specifically. That I think that is very difficult to establish a relation between what's going on in Cabo Delgado and what is going on now in part of south of Mozambique, in Maputo, in Inhambane, parts of Gaza and Nampula. I think it is very different. We have situations in Cabo Delgado with people that lost their land, for instance, that people that they lost their homes without compensation. So specific problems that I think that is a mistake to try to establish a relation between what's going on in north and what's going on in this environment that we're living now. Yes, I think it is very difficult to establish a relation between what's going on there and what's going on.
Okay, thanks. Egídio, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no big things to add. But yeah, maybe what I can say is what's happening. This let's call it, it's so-called post-electoral protest. Even if they have different origins, dynamics, they may end up having an effect to the fight against terrorism there. In which sense? Because putting much effort and attention and resource to fight against the post-electoral protest may drive the attention. Maybe in that sense, I'm just foreseeing some connection in that sense. And then some resources, some attention that should be given to fight the terrorism in the north may be diverted in that sense. But the causes are, of course, completely different. But we can say again, when we're talking about the immediate and more profound causes of the protest, there is one thing I mentioned that maybe is interesting to bring back here, which is about the poverty. I said that poverty increased in the whole country, 20% in the last 10 years, but it's increased much more in the north of the country. So there are so many inequalities, regional inequalities, but there are also urban-rural inequalities also rising and all those type of things. So yeah, directly no connection beyond, and the only thing I can say is the one I mentioned about diverting attention, and that's all.
Okay, thank you. And while you have the mic, I'm going to ask one of my last prepared questions, and then we're going to go to the many comments that are coming in, comments and questions. Of course, is the role of the region. South Africa in particular, what has our role been? How is South Africa viewed by the players, but also SADC? Given that, in my view, the whole SADC deployment in the north was a terrible failure. Didn't seem to achieve very much. I think there's been conflict with the Rwandan forces, and the Rwandans seem to have been able to do more than the SADC mission. Again, not wanting to mix the electoral crisis with the crisis in the north, but again, seeing those connections. What has been the role of the region, and what should the role of the region be? What should South Africa be doing? Egídio, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Marisa and end with André, and then we'll go to the questions from the audience.
Yeah, very interesting question, this one. You see, South Africa is the largest economy in the region, the biggest military power, leader with big influence in both SADC region, the continent, and all that. So has the unique responsibility to lead during moments of crisis. It's very influential. So, but what we saw here during this crisis, I can say here straight, is a kind of disappointing. I'm saying that straight because you see, at the inauguration, we saw the president of South Africa there. He was one of the just two presidents that attended the inauguration. And with his president, he gave some kind of legitimacy to the very contested president amid all the protests that are going on. So him attending that, I'm not saying that he should not attend, I'm just talking about the president, but with that I can talk about the South Africa in general and the leading role of such. He lost a big opportunity of a big leader as South Africa is. A leader when there is crisis, when he must show the leadership. So, and then when you stay in one side, or you position yourself by the one side, you lose that power of influence. And that's how I see South Africa now, that yeah, I missed the good opportunity of being the type of interlocutor that is needed maybe at this time of a big crisis in the country. About SADC, well, it's similar. There was a Troika meeting, put so much expectation to the Troika meeting, and the result was a kind of disappointed. I read the details about what they decided there, and most of the things were talking about protecting resources. We didn't see a big, they didn't mention the type of destruction, deaths that are happening in Mozambique, and we didn't feel the solidarity of people from SADC in general. And yeah, I was so disappointed with that. So I think it's missing a very important opportunity, because the importance on the role of all these organizations and very important countries as well of the leader is exactly to help to deal with situations like this. So yeah, it has South Africa and SADC have big roles, and I think they should rethink and play that role as such to help to have dialogue that can lead us to fix the problem we're dealing with. So yeah, I'm putting that.
Okay, thank you. Marisa?
Sure. So what Egídio said, I mean, I agree with completely. It was very disappointing to see South Africa's reaction to it. You know, first, before the election took place in October, we saw Frelimo parading around Chapo as though he was already president of Mozambique, you know, as though the election had already happened, which was a very arrogant move. But then we saw, you know, our own president, so Ramaphosa, welcome him. They also congratulated Mozambique on the elections at the end of October. The Constitutional Court in Mozambique had not ratified the results. And then, yes, as Egídio said, Ramaphosa was one of the few presidents to attend the inauguration. And I think, you know, Mozambique's a sovereign state. It ultimately has its own decisions to make, and there's only so much interference that other countries can, you know, participate in. But I think with South Africa, you know, arguably being the strongest democracy on the continent, not just the region, you know, it does have a bigger role to play. I'm always reminded of the Zimbabwean general election, which was in August 2023, when it was quite remarkable to see the SADC electoral head, who was the former vice president of Zambia, Nebus Mumba. He actually came out and he said that the SADC electoral mission had found massive irregularities in the vote in Zimbabwe, and that they had also found evidence of voter intimidation. And I think that was, you know, one of the few times that we've seen SADC actually stand up and not just seeing governments in the region, you know, blindly supporting one another. But unfortunately, that just seemed to have been a one-off event, and it would have been nice to see that happen, you know, with SADC and the situation in Mozambique now. Unfortunately, though, and this is not, you know, just for this region, it's across the continent, it's very rare to see governments criticizing one another for fear of, you know, maybe destroying liberation credentials or whatever it is. And, you know, I think the fact that the ANC and Frelimo are sister liberation movements is unfortunately a very big barrier, because despite what happened in our own election in May last year, the ANC still dictates, you know, a lot of how we behave as government. But I think also just looking at SADC's role in Mozambique, like I said, it's a sovereign state. There's only so much that these kinds of organizations and other governments can do. Mozambique is also, I mean, it's still a SADC member, but it's steadily been pivoting away from the politics of the region or of the countries that SADC involves. And it's, especially under former President Nyusi, it aligned itself much more closely to Rwanda and to Uganda, which, as we know, are not home to the most free and fair regimes. And I think because under Nyusi, we did see Mozambique, I think, become a lot more draconian. It's very telling that there has been that pivot, you know, eastward and looking away, you know, from the traditional role that it plays within Southern Africa and within SADC. And just to go to your point about the SADC troops' effectiveness in Cabo Delgado, in a way, look, it's a very difficult situation, but that mission was also really hamstrung by the fact that Nyusi didn't want SADC troops there. You know, his hand was kind of forced in that regard. Whereas Rwandan troops were really welcome there. They've been allowed to establish businesses there as well. It's just a very, very different dynamic. So I think SADC doesn't fight as hard as it should, but his role is also effectively being minimized by the turn that Mozambique has been taken in the last 10 years.
Just before going to André, two things resonate with me. One, I mean, with talking about the disappointment of the way South Africa has acted, if you close your eyes, you might be talking about Zimbabwe for the last 20 years. You know, there are so many parallels, sister liberation movement in trouble, questionable elections, and then South Africa giving the stamp of approval. And once that happens, I mean, I'm reminded also of when Yugoslavia was breaking up and Germany very quickly recognized Croatia, which arguably led to the wars in Bosnia and so forth. You know, once one of the big fish recognizes or takes a political step like that, it's very hard to wind back the clock. But André, I'll just see if you have any views, and then we're going to jump into as many of the questions as we can get to.
Let me just say two or three things about the role that the SADC can play specifically country like South Africa, that is the one is the important economy in the region. We have two problems that can make difficult the intervention of the SADC. The first one is the lack of legitimacy and the second one is about historical issues. About the lack of legitimacy, let me say that even before the National Commission of Election announced the results, what we saw is presidents like Ramaphosa and the Mnangagwa from Zimbabwe welcoming Chapu, and they did the same after the announcement of the results. So this is difficult for SADC, specifically for Ramaphosa and Mnangagwa to intervene, because there will have a situation like mistrust from the opposition, specifically from Venancio Mondlane. So I imagine him saying something like this. If he, even before the CNA announced the result, he was welcoming Frelimo. So what will be your role here? About historical issues, as you know, Frelimo is a former liberation movement, and we have most of the countries that surround Mozambique are former also a liberation movement. So it creates a sense that they treat each other as a brothers, as a friend. So in this case, they are going to protect each other. So it can also create that mistrust, specifically for Venancio Mondlane, that is the one that is the very important actor now to bring peace in Mozambique. So, looking at those 2 points, the first one, that, as I say, lack of legitimacy and historical issues, I think that we will be very difficult for SADC to intervene. I see that South Africa is very worried with the situation that we are living now, because South Africa feels that their interest, the economic interest are in danger because of this of the protest. As you know, South Africa has a lot of investments here in Mozambique, and the environment that we are living now in Mozambique puts obviously the economic interest of South Africa in danger. So that's the reason why I think that maybe Ramaphosa is going to do something in order to try to bring Venancio Mondlane to the table, and with the other leaders, including obviously Daniel Chapo, in order to bring peace in Mozambique.
Okay, thank you very much. Now to go to some of the questions. We've got a lot of them coming in, so we'll try and get through. We have about just over half an hour left, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. Esther Stefanelli says, or asks, Mozambican authorities allowed Mondlane to return to the country in early January. Can this be seen as a kind of compromise between Frelimo and Mondlane, or indicate at least that negotiations are happening? Whoever wants to jump in first on that one, just unmute and off you go. We won't ask everybody to respond to every question, so you can choose. If you don't choose yourself, I'll put it to one of you.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah, Venancio returned. That's true. And but he hasn't been included in the negotiations, as we were saying here. There were a lot of tension surrounding his return because some were saying maybe he may be killed. We know the system and the regime here, the level of repression, and there were legal actions taken against him. We're afraid those legal action could be taken a step further. So, but he arrived, and luckily, we can say the system decided not to act upon him, and he carried on mobilizing his supporters until now. His civil disobedience calls are still being he still does that, and people are still following and obeying the twin quotation marks. So the point about his arrival, about what changes in concrete, in terms of negotiation as such, no, he is still not on the table, as we said. Chapo, after being inaugurated, carried on with the talks that started with Filipe Nunes, the former president, but he does the same. He still talks with the other opposition figures without Venancio Mondlane. As André was saying here, even if this is not about Venancio as such, even if he was key, the type of mobilization that is happening, without him, we don't have the real solution for this. It's time for him to be brought on the table, and that may help to find a solution to calm the level of protest. So yeah, he's here, but he's still not in the negotiation.
Okay. Do the other two speakers want to maybe add, or we'll move to the next question? Or you can incorporate your views in the next question. So this one says, yeah, go ahead.
Let me say one or two things again. Is the fact that Venancio Mondlane is here. Obviously, has we know he is not in the table of dialogue. But considering the fact that Venancio Mondlane left Mozambique because, as he said, he was facing threats, and considering also the fact that after he left Mozambique, the justice started to move some process against him, a civil one and a criminal one, because of the protest. So when the President Nunes, the former president, called the face dialogue with the candidates, he said, President, I can come to Mozambique because I'm afraid to be killed, and also I'm afraid to be detained when I arrive in Mozambique because of the process that the justice are moving against him. So for me, it's a little bit strange to see Venancio Mondlane coming to Mozambique in a way that he came. So what I believe is the fact that it's not in the table for dialogue, but I believe that there is an agreement to allow Venancio Mondlane to be here in Mozambique and to be safe. I don't know in which consists the agreement, but what I believe, knowing our regime is a very bad regime. If they want you, they will follow you until they catch you. After that, they'll kill you. So what I believe, maybe there's an intervention of someone or some organization to allow Venancio Mondlane to be here in Mozambique and to be safe. Yesterday, I saw Venancio Mondlane going to the hospital to visit some victims of the police brutality. As you know, more than 500 of citizens have been killed of police brutality. We have 100 citizens detained, and also 100 citizens injured by the police. And I saw, and all of us saw Venancio Mondlane yesterday visiting some hospitals. So I believe that there's an agreement. I don't know in which consists this agreement, but to come to Mozambique, to this bad regime, as he said, I don't think that is a decision that he made, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to take myself, and I'm going to the mouth of the lion, because you know what can be happened with you in the mouth of the lion." So I think that there's an agreement, maybe with intervention of some organization, international organization, to allow Venancio Mondlane to be here. But what is important now, what's count now, is to take Venancio Mondlane with maximum urgency to the table, because Venancio Mondlane is we have this guy from Podemos that is called the second leader, the leader of the opposition. He is not the leader of the opposition. This one called Forquilha. Forquilha is the leader of the opposition because the law give him this opportunity. But the leader of the opposition now is called Venâncio Mondlane. Venâncio Mondlane have the most important thing that any politicians can have is the citizens, is the people, and the Venâncio Mondlane has the people with him. So it's very important. I am not undermining the other leaders that are on the table. For instance, with CHAP, I'm talking about the leader of Renamo, Usufu, and the leader of MDM, Lutero, and the leader of Nova Democracia. But it's very important to have Venâncio. If you want to bring peace in this world, it's very important to have Venâncio Mondlane in the table. But not only Venâncio Mondlane, it's important to have a very inclusive dialogue. We have to also to take academia. We have also to take religious leaders. This is not a problem of politicians. This is a problem of all the citizens, and all the citizens must be in the table to try to have a solution. In the past, here in Mozambique, we committed big mistakes. All the problems that we have after the peace agreement in 1992 is that we took our life and we put our life in the hands of the politicians. We took our life and we put in the hands of Frelimo and Renamo. This was a mistake because some of the agreements that they reached during those 13 years of democracy, not all of them was to benefit the citizens. Some of them was to benefit the parts. So now it's time to open the space to bring academia, as I say, and to bring also civil society to the table in order to try to have a solution for the crisis that we are facing now.
It sounds a little bit like Mondlane is seen as a messianic figure that's going to solve all the problems. I think it's quite dangerous to have the hope in one person. But absolutely, I hear the points that you've made. Okay, here's a difficult one for you, Marisa, from Madalitso Piri, who says the historical context of Frelimo is the deviation of socialist policies embracing neoliberalism from the 1980s until the present. Mondlane does not provide an alternative to the neoliberal project that produced an outsourced state. What political imaginaries exist for Mozambicans beyond the choice of Frelimo and a controlled opposition?
That is indeed a very difficult question, but it's completely correct that, about the historical context from, the deviation of socialist policies and embracing neoliberalism. It is very difficult to imagine a different future for that, at least in the next 10 to 20 years. So one thing we do have to remember is that Mozambique, being one of the poorest countries in the world, not just Africa, it's very reliant on aid. And, even at times when it's had budgetary support from the World Bank and the IMF back in 2016, suspended for, I think, about 5 years, it's still been a massive recipient of aid. I think the biggest donor is the US, though I stand to be corrected on that. When you are so dependent on aid, to run basic programs, unfortunately, it also means that you have to follow certain policies. And if we look at, the shift in the world from the 80s to the 90s and the rise of neoliberalism, Mozambique was effectively a victim of that. It's going to be very difficult for Mozambique to really shift away from that. And maybe that's part of the reason why Mondlane, speaks a lot about politics and, socioeconomic issues, but he doesn't really speak about economic policy, because it's difficult to imagine that kind of future. And one of the reasons why is because if we look at Mozambique since 2021, I think this was as, the insurgency in the north really started to get big and get more international attention. We did see the IMF and the World Bank actually come back and offer budgetary support again. So now it gets aid and it also gets effectively cash. And again, those two institutions are going to push more neoliberal policies, or they're going to push for a continuation on that. And no matter who's in power, partly why Frelimo did embrace some of these policies, well, that it suited them. It led to a growth of private business, which the political elite benefited from, which is a very typical story in post-colonial Africa. But it also yeah, it also left it with very, very little room, and its policies began to be dictated in a certain direction. And I mean, if you actually look beyond Mozambique at the rest of Africa, we've seen a massive return of the IMF since the COVID-19 pandemic, just because of countries being in a lot of debt, needing that additional support. So to move away from that, it's difficult to imagine a different reality. In terms of a controlled opposition, I think we've seen, it's been very positive to see Renamo actually not be the main opposition anymore, because especially under the current leader, Mohamed, he's not, there's a sense that he's not, that he hasn't really challenged Frelimo during his term as Renamo president. And I think it's good that we can see, well, at least we can have a different main opposition. It's not the first time we've seen that in Mozambique. We also had MDM, but sadly that was too reliant on the personality of its former leader, David Simangu. So that posed challenges for it, but we have seen kind of change come in. So I think that the opposition is not so tightly controlled. I just think it's not immune, from issues that plague other oppositions, like infighting, like wanting to get a slice of power.
Okay, thank you. So these questions are, I'm not really grouping them thematically, but we're trying to take them in the order in which they arrive. So Paul Stahl asks, what is actually the role of the Rwandan army in Mozambique? And are they also present and operational in the south of the country? I think I know the answer to the second one, which is a simple no. But can somebody provide some analysis on the role of the Rwandans? It has been mentioned that they've also getting lucrative mining deals and things like that. But what is the role of the Rwandan army in Mozambique? I don't know who'd like to jump in on that one. Egídio, what about you?
No, I think that's one. Oh, okay.
Now, I was saying, I think Egídio is the one that can answer this. I think he has more elements to answer this.
Egídio, the spotlight's on you.
Yeah, I was keeping that one and keeping it with André, him being journalist. But yeah, the big point is, we see Rwanda. I don't know if I quite quote the heart of the question, but Rwanda is a partnership and it supports the governments, the army in the north. And the discussions we have here is that, okay, it's a kind of France backed up army. Well, there's a suspicion, but in reality, they are mostly in the north, protecting or helping to fight insurgency in the north. But the image we have is that they are protecting the total investment in that area. I don't know if I can add big things to that. And yeah, exactly, because that's not the type of things I've been researching on. And these are the basic information that we have. Yeah,
that's fair enough. Marisa, you talked about Rwanda getting Mozambique drawing closer to Rwanda and Uganda, which are not always positive actors. I don't know if you got anything to add to that.
Sure. So yeah, basically the RDF role is to secure select districts in Cabo Delgado, obviously the ones that surround the Fungi Peninsula, that is, the home of Total Energy's massive LNG project, even though that is still on hold since 2021. There always periodic rumors that, the RDF has also been seen in the capital, but I think generally it's accepted that no, they're up in the north. A Rwandan company called Crystal Ventures has opened up several companies there as well. And then, that's when we kind of see this overlap of, trying to understand what is Rwanda's interest there as well. But Rwanda is then pretty much very happy to have Rwanda there. So they're also not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And Total is also happy to have them there. They've got Rwandan companies as their security contractors as well. So the role that Rwanda is playing there is really kind of multifaceted. It's an overlap between the Rwandan state and business.
Okay, thank you. So the next one that I'm going to read
Can
out.
I try to?
Yes, go ahead, André.
Follow me. I fully agree with Egídio and Marisa about Rwanda, but let me increase one point. We don't know if this deal between Rwanda and Mozambique is really a deal with a state or with President Nyusi, a former president, and a group in the Frelimo ruling party. There's no transparency in this intervention. Stephen said that the SADC left Mozambique, but no one knows why exactly the SADC mission left Mozambique. What we heard is that there's no money to fund the mission. So where do we find money to fund the Rwanda mission? So it's not clear. If we consider that the money is coming from UA, why don't UA don't give this money for SADC? So for me, this is not a deal with the state. This is a deal with President Nyusi and the party of the members of Frelimo ruling party. And the another point is that they are not there to fight against terrorism. They are there to protect total interest. Where do we have total? Where do we have troops? We have in Musimba, we have in Palma, and the parts of Mueda. Mueda is the home of President Nyusi and the General Shipand and the others that are from the same line with President Nyusi. So it's very strange, this mission, and I think that President Chapo has to investigate just to bring the truth about this intervention. I don't know if you heard about the hidden deaths here in Mozambique during the government of President Gebuza. Maybe here we are in front of another kind of hidden debts in this intervention of Rwanda. So it's very important for President Chapo to do something in order to bring the truth, because there's a lot of things that must be disclosed, and the truth is needed now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One of the questions that came in while you were talking about aid, Marisa, was what is the expected or the anticipated consequences of this aid freeze that Trump has declared? President Trump has declared for 90 days a freeze on aid projects. So, I mean, in South Africa, there's been a lot of focus on PEPFAR, the presidential funding for AIDS relief, which is in jeopardy. There's millions of people on antiretrovirals, for example, but this is going to have such wide repercussions. I think the only countries exempted from the aid freeze are Israel, Egypt, and Ukraine at the moment. So Mozambique being such a country that's so heavily dependent on aid, and I would imagine a lot of it coming from the US, this could be have very far-reaching consequences. Or am I exaggerating or guessing wrong? Marisa, maybe you start with you, and then the others can come in.
Sure. No, you're correct that it does have very big consequences, and not just for Mozambique, but for many, many countries in Africa, particularly these kinds of programs that are specifically funded, like things like USAID, for example, where they do a lot of health programs across countries. They are responsible for, there's other organizations that are responsible for distributing medicines. There's other educational campaigns as well. This freeze by Trump has a very wide impact, because effectively a lot of these organizations cannot function without that kind of funding. They rely on funding from the US state. And unfortunately, with many countries, including Mozambique, so reliant on aid, they are going to be in for a very difficult time if it doesn't resume, because there isn't that kind of self-reliance that one would have hoped that they would have by now. And that's going to be, the order came very suddenly, so there's been very little time to react to it, and it's been very chaotic. And I think it will be very difficult for Mozambique and all of those programs there. People will likely leave the country while they figure out what they need to do. But yeah, it has a big impact, especially because there is an urgent need, for healthcare support, social support, educational support as well. I don't think all aid will stop though I think it's under a specific order into certain programs, but you also get general aid that the US does disperse to Mozambique, and that should be safe. But Trump is also very unpredictable, so that really, it remains to be seen what will actually happen.
Yeah, I think a very worrying sign. Let's go on to one of the next questions. Somebody asks here, Mozambique's opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane, does not appear to be acting alone. His recent travels abroad and subsequent returns suggest he may have secured significant international backing. Given Mozambique's historical ties to both socialist countries and its strong Western presence, is it worth considering whether the country is becoming the stage for a stage for a proxy conflict? André, maybe you want to take that. Is there international backing behind Mondlane and what he's trying to do, or is this, as we are led to believe, an indigenous, spontaneous uprising by the people? What do you think? André, are you there? We can't hear you.
Yes, I am. Can you please repeat the question, please?
Asking whether that Mondlane doesn't appear to be acting alone. His recent travels abroad and subsequent return suggest he may have secured international backing, significant international support. Given Mozambique's historical ties to both the socialist countries and its strong Western presence, is it worth considering whether the country is becoming a stage for a proxy conflict? Is Mozambique now becoming an area where the US on the one side and the Europeans are going to be fighting the Russians and the Chinese?
Yeah, maybe there are issues with André network there.
Okay, do you want to maybe take that? And
I can jump in
sure.
there, because there are a lot of speculation about who's funding Venancio, and it's understandable the type of organizations he managed to bring for these protests is unprecedented. It's true. Some support must be there. We don't know exactly from where. But for me, what's much more important there is that, you see, and we mentioned it earlier, internally, you see, people are connected, people see in Venancio, maybe, or he embodies the type of tensions that are inside the country. Because even if there is any type of support, there are any intention from outside, if internally there are no those cleavages that can be mobilized, that cannot succeed. So if his movement succeeds, it's because there are problems here inside. We should focus in discussing that and fixing that type of issues, because that's the reason we get problems, and we will all carry on having, because the system really always mobilize such type of explanations to justify even the hidden debts Mulungo mentioned here. At the beginning, when it was discovered, they used to say that no, someone from outside the country was trying to bring problems to the country and so on and so forth. We ended up discovering that that was not coming from outside. There were issues and the internal problems, and the debt was hidden and everything. So that's an excuse. We have internal problems. Those who are in power have to deal with them and fix those problems. That's the only way they can survive. And that's one thing I wanted to connect, because we didn't talk much about it, which is the key message being sent here by people. I said that we have a kind of a reshape of citizenship. I did use such type of terms, and I had Marisa also saying that there is a message which is sent for, I think it's Mulungo also talked about that, for the former liberation movements in power. And this is true. People now want different things. People don't buy those liberation narratives. So those in power need to understand these new dynamics, find solutions, govern as they should, and that's the only way. So yeah, those speculations, they may be true or not, but there are internal problems that they need to be dealt with if any system wants to survive or anyone wants to retain power. Yeah, that's how I prefer to frame that question.
Okay, in the last few minutes,
I just wanted to.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that. I think when we ask those kinds of questions, we have to remember two things. The first is that Mondlane has gotten, massive international attention from this election, but he's not new on Mozambique's political scene. When he was with Renamo before, we had the same kind of dissatisfaction with Mozambican citizens feeling like, he was not being treated fairly in electoral processes. Mozambique also has local elections. He's also been very, very prominent in those. So, like Egídio said, whether or not, there is some external support for him, it doesn't take away from the internal problems that Mozambique has. And it doesn't take away from the fact that Mondlane is not new to the scene. It's just, gathered a lot of momentum since the 9th of October. But this has been going on for a while. The other thing is that Frelimo is very good at externalizing the problems in Mozambique. So, for example, it blames the insurgency on ISIS. Now maybe it's going to blame the protests on external forces supporting Mondlane. Then, the economy did very poorly in 2024. It's going to say it's because of the protests. None of those things are true. So I think we also have to be careful about the kind of messaging that we see coming out of the country and where it's coming from and how that's shaping a very specific kind of narrative that actually just suits the incumbents.
Thank you.
So, Steve, if you allow me.
Yes, I do.
Steve was saying that it's very dangerous to believe in a person or to take a country and put in the hands of a person like Lourenço. What's important, before let me answer the questions, those kinds of narratives are narratives sold by the regime when the regime want to discreditabilize the certain movements or certain position. It's normal even here in Mozambique to say that the civil society organizations founded by A, B, C to create the stabilization in the country. So it's normal for us to eat those kinds of narratives, and not narratives normally used by the regime. As Egídio said, we have internal problems. If someone is going to use these internal problems, it's because here internally we didn't have, or maybe there's no will to try to solve this. The problem is not with a group of people that are using Venas, the problem is with us here internally, that we are sleeping and we are not responding the demands of the citizens. I am aware of the risk that Lourenço Mondlane is a human being like everyone here. It's normal tomorrow, for instance, to hear that Lourenço Mondlane received his party of money, as we are hearing here that the leader of Podemos also received. But the day that Lourenço Mondlane is going to act like this, he has to understand that will be the end of his political career. Has happened with Oussouf Momadi. Oussouf Momadi, when he came in power to rule Renamo, he made some alliance with Frelimo ruling party and with President News. It's Oussouf Momadi himself that came and said that he have agreement with President News. And as you see, where is now Renamo? Renamo was the main important part that we have, but now they don't have 13 parliamentarians there because of the behavior of Oussouf. So if Lourenço Mondlane want to betray the citizens are going to do the same that they did with Renamo and they did with other leaders. So we are aware of the risk that that the risks are there, even to be betrayed, as I say. President Molani is a human being, but importantly, what we have to understand here, and I underline this movement that we are living now, is not because of Venus Molani, it's because of the citizens that are tired, that the citizens that are demanding change. This is, how can I say, is any example of disappointment with the government of Frelimo. These 15 years of government of Frelimo. This is not because of Venus Molani. They are saying, you that are now in power, we are no longer happy with what you are doing. Try to change things. And if you don't change, we will continue protesting. We'll continue in the streets until we see the things change. So I'm not here to promote Venus Molani. I understand that Venus Molani is a human being, as Usuf Mohammad is a human being. Everything can happen. But now, Venus Molani is the one that have the vote of the people. The people believes in Venus Molani. If you want to bring peace, you have to take this guy to the table. It's very important. And because he is the one that can I don't know if is the correct expression, is holding the problems of the citizens, and the citizens believe that Venus Molani is one that can save their hope and their demands.
Okay, thank you. I see we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I see my chairman, Mr. Moletsi Mbeki, has his hand up. Laura, are you able to make Moletsi audible? Moletsi, if you unmute, you can ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. And really, I must thank the panelists for briefing us about the situation in Mozambique. Now, Mozambique has had another conflict in the past, which really horrified me amongst many people, which was the Renamo era in the 1980s. At the time, I was a journalist in Zimbabwe, and I used to visit the refugee camps, and it was horrific to see the condition of the Mozambican population in those camps. So, from my point of view, we don't want another armed conflict in Mozambique. That is point number one, is that there shouldn't be an armed conflict like the one there was in the 1980s, that conflict. South Africa was in it and all sorts of reasons, but anyway, I think the devastation on the population sets the country back for many years. The second comment I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman, is that there are a number of key characteristics of the region, of the Southern Africa region. Characteristic one is it is very integrated economically region. It has a massive infrastructure that connects the whole region. The other day, a few weeks ago, there were some adventurers, I think from the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, who went by train from Cape Town to Maputo, from Maputo to Harare, from Harare to Lusaka, and then they ended up in Dar es Salaam. So this is a very economically integrated region. For this, we have to thank the colonialists, especially a gentleman called Cecil Rhodes. So that's one part about characteristic of it. The second part of characteristic of our region is that it's a very politically integrated region. Just before the new year, the ANC sent out a message saying that it is convening a meeting or a conference of former liberation movements. And it listed Frelimo, MPLA, CCM, okay, who am I missing?
ZANU-PF.
ZANU-PF, how can I miss ZANU-PF? So,
And SWAPO, probably.
So the liberation movements worked with the free governments in Southern Africa, like the Tanzanian government, the Zambian government, and so on. So we have a politically integrated region. So the point I really would like the panelists, or I'm not sure if we have the time, Stephen.
We can make that their swan song, Moletti. So ask your question.
Okay. You see, for me, and I have lived in the region, and I have to thank the apartheid regime for making me a refugee. I've lived in Tanzania, in Lesotho, in Zambia, Zimbabwe. What is clear to me, the conflicts in the African countries in Southern Africa, the individual countries have no capability to solve their conflict problems or their conflicts. They according to list, which when I was during the presentation, I identified 7 unstable countries in South Africa: DRC, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, Angola, and Swaziland. This conflict, each of these countries has this, and it can't solve those conflicts themselves. Mozambique can't solve its conflicts itself. Zimbabwe can't solve its conflicts itself, and so on and so forth. So what seems to me is that we have a forum of the elite, of the ruling elites in Southern Africa, which is the SADC system, the SADC structure, as well as the former liberation movement structure. So those are the structures of the elite. And as you pointed out, the first person to congratulate Frelimo for rigging the election was the ANC. They are part of that system. But what we need, what is now becoming clear, is we need the structure of the people in our region for the liberation of the people. Now, I don't expect the panelists to respond to this. All I can say, Mr. Chairman, is I would like the Institute of International Affairs to organize a bigger conference over 2 or 3 days to address the issue of a people's parallel structure to one of the ruling elites in the SADC region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll have to speak to my chairman about that. Thank you, Moletti. I'll just give the speakers, because we are already over time by 3 minutes, I'll give you each 1 minute to make any concluding comments you'd like to make. Maybe you can include whether you think we will still be sitting here in a year's time worrying about this, or whether we will have some kind of resolution. So let's start with André, then Egídio, and we'll finish with Marisa. Folks, if you do need to go, that's fine. We are over our time, but please stay with us for their final comments if you can. André.
Thank you, Steve, for the opportunity in the name of Center for Democracy and Human Rights to be part of this webinar. The first thing to say is that the situation is not good. Now things are a little bit calm, but we still have a protest after Venâncio Mondlane say that in the next 3 months, if the government don't accept some demands that for the people, the protest can continue. Has civil society or organization dealing with human rights and democracy we are very concerned with all the situation. As I said, since 21st October, because of the police brutality, we lost more than 500 citizens killed by police. We have 100 citizens injured, and also 100 citizens detained by the police. So we don't want more violent protests. So that's the reason why we advocate for a dialogue, a very inclusive dialogue with the politicians, obviously, but this dialogue must include civil society organization, must include the academia and the religious leadership. And this is very urgent. It's also important to include Venance Mondlane as the one that is controlling the people and the citizen in order to have peace. As the well, let's say we had 16 years of a civil war in Mozambique, and it was very bad for everyone, and we don't want more war. So it's important now to solve this, to pass this very bad moment through a dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for your wonderful, excellent comments. Egídio and then Marisa, just very briefly.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, I'm tempted to make a quick comment on what Mr. Mbeke said about the SADC being connected and at the same time being kind of fragile at the same time, and to find solutions together for this. And my comment is about the message the situation Mozambique is sending to other SADC countries, which is a message of a warning message. And the message is that when states fail to address legitimate grievances, they risk instability and losing public trust. That's what's happening in Mozambique. And when people, citizens raise up, they are crying, and it's up to each government, each state to decide if it responds with repression or reform. So far in Mozambique, we still have repression, and it's the pessimistic scenario I mentioned, and we would like to have a reforms, which is the optimistic with the dialogue. So Mozambique's story is a kind of a mirror, urging its neighbors to reflect before they face similar unrest. So that's those are the things I wanted to add as a comment connected to the question about the links with the other SADC countries. So the rest is just to thank you for the opportunity. These are my last words, and yeah, we hope things get better by this side, even if now we are in that worst scenario, the pessimistic. So that's important to mention.
Thank you very much, Egídio. And Marisa, you can have the last word.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so my sense is that, the protests that we saw post-election and how big those got, my sense is that we have passed that. And my sense is that, Frelimo is going to carry on and conduct a dialogue that doesn't include Mondlane, and it's just going to try push on like nothing has really changed. And I think what this means for Mozambique is that it's going to kind of settle, but it's going to be very uneasy. And I think that we have seen a shift. It's not a big enough shift yet that we're seeing, true political change. But I think that we're going to see actually what we've seen for the last 3 to 5 years. We do see high levels of protests, and what these elections have shown is just how much dissatisfaction there is. And that's not something that's likely to die down in the short term, even if it, I think, will calm down from just how bad it's been for the last few months. I think that things will change a lot for international private companies that are operating in Mozambique, and we have already seen examples of this. But the biggest thing that these elections have done is they've shown citizens and populations that they do have some power. It might be limited, but there is some power to push the needle. And they might start becoming much more vocal in asserting some of their socio-political rights. And if you're a mine or you're a big LNG company and you've got to deal with communities, these communities, yeah, they're much more confident now. They know what protest can do. And I think that that's one of the big changes that we're going to see in how these communities interact, not expecting the state to help them anymore. I think that phase has definitely disappeared, but certainly expecting much more from private companies and realizing that protest does have a very functional purpose and can actually get them somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, and also I just want to say thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, to Egídio and André as well.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pity we couldn't see Egídio and André all the time because of bad connection, but we see you now. Thank you to all my panelists. I'd like to say a special thank you to Isabel Bosman, who put this together, and we had a really great attendance. If people are interested, it will be on the SAIIA YouTube channel. I think it'll be there immediately, or if not, certainly by tomorrow. You're welcome to watch it. Thank you, everybody, for a really engaging discussion. Very important, and we will be watching Mozambique closely and hoping and praying that things get better rather than worse. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you very much for your attendance, and good afternoon.